All right, today we are going to pick a little bit of a fight with a word. It's a word that is, well, everywhere. It's the goal we're all supposed to be chasing in life, at work, you name it. And that word is empowerment. I mean, it really is the holy grail, isn't it? You see it in corporate mission statements, on the cover of self-help books, probably on a coffee mug somewhere in your house. We're constantly told to take control, to own our destiny, and we all just kind of nod along. I mean, who would ever argue for being disempowered? But what if that's the wrong way to look at it? What if our obsession with empowerment is actually a symptom of a much deeper problem? That's the challenge that our source material is throwing down today. That this thing we all praise so highly might actually be a kind of trap. Okay, so let's get into it. We're diving into a text called The Architecture of Accuracy, and its whole argument is that our culture has made this huge, dangerous mistake. We've confused power, which is our ability to force an outcome, with accuracy, our ability to see a situation clearly. And this text argues that confusion is making us absolutely miserable. So let's unpack that diagnosis a bit. Why does this perspective basically take a sledgehammer to our modern idea of empowerment? Well, it starts with a pretty heavy phrase to describe what it thinks is really going on under the surface. Egoic compensation. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful, right? It kind of sounds like a very polite therapist way of saying you're a little bit delusional. But what it's really getting at is this idea that we puff ourselves up psychologically to protect ourselves when we feel small. And think about it, this makes so much sense. You don't need to feel empowered to make your morning coffee. You just do it. This perspective says we only reach for the concept of empowerment when we're already feeling small, powerless, or totally confused. You know, when we're facing a budget cut at work, a health crisis, some situation that is just fundamentally not in our control. Exactly. The argument is that in those really terrifying moments, we use empowerment like a narrative drug. We tell ourselves this story. I can conquer this. I am in control. Not because it's true, but because facing the reality that we're just not is way too scary. And here's where it gets dangerous. Because if you're standing on your roof during a hurricane telling yourself you can control the wind, you are not inside boarding up the windows. By puffing yourself up and exaggerating your own agency, you actually blind yourself to reality and stop seeing the practical, useful steps you could have been taking. So, okay, if this endless chase for empowerment is a trap, then what's the alternative? Well, the source suggests a really radical shift in our whole point of view, moving away from this very modern obsession and toward a much more ancient way of seeing things. Now, this slide right here, this is the absolute heart of the entire idea. The modern, empowered mind walks into any situation and asks, what can I make happen here? How can I impose my will? It's all about output. But these older, ancient traditions, they asked a completely different question. What is happening here, and where do I fit into it? And that's the whole shift. The goal isn't to turn you into some kind of superhero who can bend reality to your will. No, the goal is just to give you a more accurate map of reality, to restore a sense of proportion so you know where the walls are, and more importantly, where the doors are. Now, to help us actually use this map, the text offers what it calls a toolkit of mental models. These are basically a few key distinctions, a series of binaries that we tend to get wrong all the time, which leads us to, constantly push on doors that are clearly marked pull. Okay, this first one is a classic, especially for high achievers. Influence versus control. See, control is mechanical. It's a closed loop. You pull a lever and a thing happens predictably. But influence, that's an open system. It's like pouring a bucket of water into a river. Sure, you add to the flow, but you never, ever become the river. And this builds on that last idea. Let's look at the next pair, participation versus command. Asking, what can I make happen? That's an attempt to command the situation, to be the one driving the bus. But asking, what is happening, puts you in a mindset of participation. You're part of a much bigger process, but you are not the sole author. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Participation? That sounds kind of weak, right? A little passive, like an excuse for not doing anything? Well, the text has a perfect one-word comeback for that exact thought. Surfing. Just think about it for a second. Is a surfer passive? No way. They're in a state of what you could call hyperactive participation. They are constantly adjusting, balancing, reading the water. It takes incredible strength and focus. But they do not command the wave. In fact, the second a surfer tries to tell the wave where to go, they drown. The empowered mind wants to build a dam. The accurate mind learns to ride the wave. And that brings us to the final pair here. This is not about avoiding responsibility. The author is really clear on this. You are 100% responsible for your part. You have to own your balance on that surfboard. But you do not have dominance. You don't own the ocean.
So let's really tackle that feeling of weakness head on, because it's a real sticking point. Our modern culture has basically trained us to see anything that isn't total dominance as some form of passivity. The author calls it a kind of optical illusion. See, according to this view, our very definition of what action even is has been totally corrupted. We've convinced ourselves that the only valid form of action is forcing our will onto something. So naturally, when we see someone practicing alignment or participation, it looks to us like they're just sitting there doing nothing.
So the key is to reframe it. Think about a master woodworker. They don't just smash their chisel into a piece of wood and force it to bend. No, they study the grain, they feel the material, they work with it. Their action is totally constrained and contextual, and that's not weakness, that's accuracy, that's alignment. Okay, so what's the actual payoff here? Why would we ever give up this grand fantasy of control? Well, it's not just about, being more zen. The real payoff is sanity, it's clarity, and it's a profound conservation of your own energy. I mean, this one has to hit home, right? If you wake up every single day believing that you can and should bend the entire universe to your will, you are literally setting yourself up for constant daily failure. You're trying to carry the weight of the world on a suspension bridge that was designed to hold a bicycle. It is the very architecture of modern burnout. But here's the beautiful part. This is the release. When you finally let go of that exhausting, impossible pretense of control, you're not actually losing anything. The text is so clear on this. That reduction in ego isn't a loss. It is the beginning of clarity. All of that energy you were wasting trying to micromanage the uncontrollable is suddenly freed up to actually see and deal with what's right in front of you. And so that's the final thought I want to leave you with. We usually think our anxiety comes from feeling helpless, but what if it's the exact opposite? What if your anxiety actually comes from the exhausting, impossible belief that you were supposed to be in control of all of this, all along? And what kind of freedom could you find if you just decided to put that burden down?